Hi, Kyle. Welcome on. How are you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on. Great to be with you.
So glad you're here. And for those who may not know you from your books or you as a pastor, can you share a little bit about yourself, your family, and where you're from?
Yeah, my wife Desiree and I have been married for 27 years, and we have four kids. So my oldest is 25. She and her husband live pretty close to us. My wife and my oldest daughter, they run a horse farm here in Kentucky that I don't have much to do with. Like they they do the work, and it's a really cool business that they operate, but it is their thing, and so they do that together. And then my middle daughter Morgan, she and her husband also live in town, and just gave us our first grandchild. So I'm officially
Oh,
grandfather as of like 9 months ago. So loving that a lot. Then my youngest daughter is Macy, and she is living in Florida right now. She's 21, going to school and working out there. And then my son is 18, just graduated from high school, getting ready to start college. So we are officially empty nesters.
mm,
So that's the season that we're in. But we've lived in Louisville, Kentucky here for about 20 plus years, I guess.
wow.
And I've been a pastor at the same church here, Southeast Christian Church in Louisville. Before that, I was a church planter. My wife and I started a new church in Southern California, not too far from where you are. And so we both grew up in small towns in the Midwest, went to California, and then came to Kentucky.
Mm, so fun. So, yeah, you have a lot going on. You have married kids, you have kids out of school, you have a new grandbaby on the way. That's so much fun. So, you have a full life. And that probably plays a little bit into what we're going to be talking about today. You have a new book called When Your Way Isn't Working. And so you have some personal experience in this arena. Can you share a little bit about your story and how it led you to writing this book?
Well, to be clear, I've had plenty of ways that things were not working for me in the past. I wrote a little bit more about the recent experiences around that, but as I talk about my kids, you can do the math and figure out that I had four teenagers, in the house at the same time, and I can tell you that my way often wasn't working. And I think most parents know the frustration of, oh, my way worked good with kids 1 and 4, but not so great with kids 2 and 3. And I don't think I did anything different. So why is my way working here and not working over here? And then, my wife and I got married when we were really young. We were 19 and 20 years old. And so it was definitely a season of, after the first year or two of our way not working as husband and wife, and having to learn how to do things that were not our way, do things different. So I've had no shortage of experience of my way not working, as most of us have. But I more recently experienced that in a unexpected way. So I became the senior pastor of the church I'm at maybe four years ago ish, and went through COVID, kind of a crazy time, and I just found myself exhausted. I was just worn out. It wasn't burnout, like emotionally I felt okay, but physically I was just tired a lot. I was more irritable with people, more easily offended than I used to be, more sensitive about things that didn't used to bother me, some of that. And then I just had kind of this underlying anxiety that I didn't recognize as anxiety because it didn't surface to me as worry. It just was this, oh, recognition of how little I had control over.
Mm.
Where in the past, I think when my way wasn't working, I would try to fix it by, doubling down on effort and coming up with a good action plan and putting it on the refrigerator and sticking with it. Like that would have been the way I dealt with things not working. And then just recognizing that that was not going to do it. Like there was just too many things that were going on that I just didn't have a lot of control over. So, my wife had been telling me for a number of months, hey, you just have not been yourself lately. I think when you hear that from people who know you and love you,
Mhm.
that's an indication that something you think is working isn't working, because other people tend to notice your way isn't working before you do, And so I had heard her say, and then I had a few friends say something similar to me. Finally a buddy of mine was like, hey, you should go see a friend of mine who's an executive coach. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe that's a good idea. Make an appointment with an executive coach. And then I get on the phone with this executive coach, and I, like 5 minutes into it, realize he's a therapist. He's just calling himself an executive coach. It's easier to talk to somebody who says I'm an executive coach. Shouldn't be, but I suppose it is. And so it set me down this path of recognizing and trying to learn, what it looks like when my way or when our way isn't working. Because as I went through this, I'd recognize the reality of this as a pastor in other people's lives. Oh, all the time, where they come to church and their way's not working. That's why they're at church. And, sitting down with them and recognizing, okay, when your way isn't working, here's how that starts to surface. Here are some ways that begins to show up. Here's some indications that something in your life is misaligned and needs some attention.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners can probably relate to what you're talking about. And I know for me, when I was reading your book, it hit home like within the first page. I was like, oh yeah, this sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are listeners who are feeling stuck, who are feeling worn out in their personal life right now. So do you have some encouragement, some wisdom that you would give to listeners who are feeling that way?
Yeah. First, your words are helpful, because I think it's important when you're in that place to know you're not alone. That it can feel like you are. You can look online or on social media, and it seems that everybody else's ways were working okay. It can feel like you're the only one who's struggling to the degree that you are. And what I can tell you as a pastor is that you're definitely not alone. I do this thing not every Tuesday morning, but most Tuesday mornings I meet with some of our leaders and we pray for the needs of people in the church. And I'll post on social media, hey, if there's any way that we can pray for you, please let us know. And people will message me back. Nobody else can see it but me. But I'll read through, sometimes thousands of different prayer requests. And what often strikes me is the need next to the profile picture, because they're often mismatched. Like the need is more desperate and the picture is not. And I'm not saying it should be. Nobody needs to post desperate pictures. I'm not saying it should be aligned. I'm just saying that you're not alone, that it can seem that others aren't struggling, but others are struggling in different ways and at different times to different degrees. When your way isn't working is fine when it lasts a day or two, or even a week or two. The challenge is when that gets extended and it's months at a time, or it's years at a time, or no one has given you anything different to do and you've done everything to do and it's still not working. And then hopelessness starts to set in, and then despair, and that loneliness of that is quite overwhelming. And so, I write in the book about 4 different symptoms, I guess, of your way not working, different emotions that tend to surface. And when I mention these, you might think, well, I feel those things every day. Well, yeah, that's because every day something in our life happens where it's not working. It's the prolonged, it's the prolonged nature of it, where these things settle in and they become part of who we are, and they show up all at once. And so the 4 things I talk about in the book are first, discouragement. It's this prolonged sense of discouragement where you're just living with a lack of courage, and it's okay to do that for a day or two. But when that becomes the way you live, just this discouraged approach to life, I mean, that doesn't work for you, and it doesn't work for the people around you, and it's not how God created you to live. Right. When you feel discouraged, it's typically, we think it's because of circumstances. Well, I'm discouraged because, my child is struggling in this way at school, or I'm discouraged because, I thought my marriage would be more this way and it's more that way. I'm discouraged because my health challenge. Like there's something that we can point to, and we think that our discouragement would go away if that circumstance could change or somehow be different. And then the second thing would be frustration. Like when you're just frustrated over things that don't normally frustrate you, just more irritated with people. And, somebody says something and they don't mean anything by it, but you've taken it personally, and you're replaying that in your head, and you can't let it go. That frustration with others is a sense that your way is not working. The fatigue is another symptom of this, where you just feel tired and you're not sure why. For me, one of the ways this surfaced was I would come home from work and I would lay on my couch and I would get on my phone for 15, 20 minutes after work. And my wife's like, "What are you doing? Why are you laying on the couch on your phone? You just got home from work. What are you doing?" And I'd be like, I just need to rest for a few minutes. And there's nothing wrong with coming home and resting for a few minutes, but that's not really what I was doing. Right. Like I was just not engaging. I was just tired. And so when the people who really needed my emotional energy the most, at the time when they needed it the most, at the end of the day, when I first get home, was the time I was checking out and too tired. And so, fatigue is a big one. And then lastly is anxiety, just kind of this underlying sense that I mentioned earlier of just not being able to control different things and not knowing how to process that. So, when those things start to surface, when those things begin to show up, then it's a good opportunity to stop and ask yourself, okay, what areas are my ways not working?
Yeah. It's so funny. My husband has noticed that I've been getting more like scared easily, like startled more easily. And I'm like,
okay,
there might be a reason to that. Like I probably have a little extra anxiety or something
that's interesting
inside that
yeah
gets me more startled, like on edge more.
on
So
edge.
it's interesting that, there are those things that come out that, we should look deeper into. And like you said, it's so much better when we have people around us who can point those things out to us as well and lovingly come alongside us and help us in that as well. So you dug into those 4 points. And then I know there's also examples of distractions that can hinder our connection to God as well, right? All those things not only hinder our connection with people around us, but also with God. So can you share some examples of distractions that can hinder our connection to God and how we can counter those?
Yeah, it's really interesting to live at the time in which we do, because connection more than ever is about not being distracted. Like, meaning that in the past, I don't know, 20 years ago, if you were going to talk about connecting more deeply with God and with people around you, you would rightly talk about, hey, here's some new things you need to do. Here's some habits you need to develop. Here's some ways you can be intentional. And certainly those conversations are still needed. And I still unpack some of those things in the book. But the biggest challenge is the distraction. Like it's not necessarily what you're needing to add, although things need to be added. It's what needs to be taken away. It's finding opportunities to be more present and more focused. And the only way to do that is to become really honest with yourself about where your attention is going. And to me, the most convicting, tangible way to measure this is by opening up your phone and looking at your screen time and seeing where your time is going. I mean, it will, for most of us, tell the story of our attention, of where we give attention, not just where we give it, but when we give it. Because one of the things that I've noticed is I've done this exercise with people now where I'll say to them, hey, before you do this, before you open up your phone and check your screen time, I want you to take a guess, write down how much time you're spending a day on a screen. What percentage of that time is spent on different applications or websites, and when are you doing it? And what I've discovered is that we're horrible at gauging that. Like we underestimate it completely. And when we are online and when we're on our screens, we rarely ever think about. But as you look at the time of it, like what times a day you're on it, what you'll notice I believe for most of us, would be that the times you're connected to your screen are the times that you should be connecting with God and with others in an intentional way.
Mm.
So when you're waking up in the morning, you're starting your day, uh, biblically, I can make a really compelling case that that should be your time with God.
Mm.
What a lot of us do is we wake up, we get on our phones, we check their schedule for the day, we check the news for the day, we see what's on social media, we work our way through, scroll our way through the morning, and then in the evening, we come home after school or after work. When you finally get some time, the kids are in bed asleep. Like you'll see spikes like during that time, which should be a time where if you're married, you're connecting with your spouse, or if you come home from work and you're connecting with your kids, like the windows of time, and then in bed at night. This is a big one for people too. And I have just discovered that we're not very good at objectively recognizing that. Like
Mm.
we think we're doing okay, and then we look at it and we're like, oh, this is a problem. Like it's pretty self-revealing. And so I would just encourage our listeners to have the courage to do that, and if they're willing to share it with somebody. Hey, by the way, the how you've got a problem is if you look at it and you won't share it with anybody. Like when my wife asks to see my screen time and I don't want to share it with her, that tells the story, right? So, but when you share it with somebody that helps hold you accountable and gives you some further encouragement, I think that goes a long way.
Mm.
But that distraction, it makes a big difference. So think in terms of input and output, like being intentional with your input, what is coming into your heart and your mind, whether you want it to or not. It's the law of gravity of this. It applies to you even if you don't agree with it. It affects how you are able to connect with God and the people around you.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. We can't retain things. We can't look at things. We can't see things without it affecting our hearts, without it affecting our minds. It's the way it works. And in your book, you talk about this idea of connecting to God, to abide in the vine, be one with him. And so what do you believe is the biggest misconception about surrendering our way to Jesus?
I think for most of us, we hear the word surrender and it feels like loss. In other words, when my way is not working, the one thing I don't want to do is quit. I don't want to surrender, but surrender biblically is not quitting. It's connecting. It is dependence. It's recognizing your need that you can't do it on your own. So it's not giving up. It's saying, God, I can't do this without you. And it's only in surrendering that we can finally begin to experience life and strength. And so the metaphor that Jesus gives in John 15, I think is really helpful here. He's traveling with his followers outside of Jerusalem late at night, just finished with dinner in the upper room, heading to Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus knows time with his disciples is about out. And he sees these branches and vines sprawling along the side of the road. And he just says to them, I'm the vine, you're the branch. If you remain in me and I remain in you, you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can't do anything. And so the job description of this disciple is to just be the branch. And I think this is so helpful. It's helpful for me as a pastor. It's helpful for me as a parent. That if I can understand that my first priority is connection to the vine, is to be the branch, then everything else will begin to grow. Mm-hmm. And so it feels like there's a disconnect. It doesn't always seem like there's this immediate connection or impact for me as a dad by intentionally connecting deeply with Jesus. But when I do that, I experience production in these other ways. Like it has to be connection, then production. And I just think that's really difficult for us. Like we know our responsibilities and we feel like there's a lot of demands on our time. And We have a tendency to prioritize anything that's tangible, like I've got to get this done today. Connection is rarely tangible, whether that's to God or to your spouse or to your kids, meaning that you can't immediately measure it. Like if I know when I mow the grass, like I can tell I did it and it feels good because I can mark it off my list and I can see what I got done. If I go for a walk with my wife, it's not, there's nothing I can point to and say, look what I did. But the cumulative effect of that connection is what's most important. And so, we tend to lean into the more production oriented, more tangible expressions of how we spend our time, but it's connection, Jesus says, that really allows for production to take place. And so I think 11 times in those verses in John 15, Jesus says, remain in me or abide in me, stay connected to me. So on this, last night with his followers, before he would be arrested, he just says again and again and again, just be the branch, just stay connected to me, stay connected to me. And I would just encourage our listeners with that. Like, I know when you wake up in the morning and you just don't know how you're going to get through the day and the demands just seem nonstop. And, you wake up to baby crying in the next room and that's how you're starting your day, is changing a diaper. It can feel like the one thing you don't have time for is your connection with God. But my encouragement to you would be to prioritize the connection and then trust him with some of the production that can feel overwhelming.
And it's so much easier when we know who our God is, right? When we know that he is trustworthy, when we know that he is sovereign and in control, that he knows the beginning from the end, versus when we try to do it our own way, we try to trust in ourselves and have that control. It does not go, because we are not God. It does not go well when we try to do it our way.
That's really good. Thank you for making that connection. The surrender and trust go together. Like if you trust who God is, then surrendering and connecting to him more deeply makes complete sense. If you don't trust him, then that becomes really difficult, and Jesus says, I'm the vine. I think what a lot of us do is we make ourselves the vine. Our culture tends to uphold that value of, self-determination and that independence approach. Like you can do it. Like when your way's not working, the most natural thing in the world to do is to double down on your way. Like to say, okay, I got to do things my way even more in hopes that things will start working. And that's just rarely an effective approach, and it requires surrender, where you're letting go of your way and you're trusting God's way.
Yes. So good. You've touched on this a little bit with parent-child relationships, but what would you say parents can do to help their children navigate difficult situations, to find purpose and contentment in their lives as well?
First I would say to model that for your kids, age appropriate. You want to let them know when you've had a bad day or when things are challenging for you, and you might not always be able to share everything. You don't want them to carry your burdens, but for them to be able to see you model connection with Jesus in those moments is invaluable. I mean, that's so significant. In the same way, modeling the consistent connection, there's something really powerful about your kids. If they wake up in the morning, I'm thinking elementary age kids, and they walk into the kitchen and they see their mom in a robe holding a cup of coffee with the Bible on her lap, you don't have to say anything. Like, I mean, that picture, that image that they wake up to in the morning will change the course of their lives. Like just that, oh, this is how my mom started every day. Has such a profound impact on your kids. When they see you model that kind of connection and prioritize that kind of connection. And then I would encourage parents to leverage like the high connection opportunities of every day. Like, so research would say that, for parents, there's like 3 windows here where a little goes a long way. It's in the morning when they wake up. It's when if they're school age, it's when they come home from school, and then it's when they go to bed at night. And that if in those moments you will focus on, a connection opportunity with them, it doesn't take a lot. Like 2 or 3 minutes of focused attention can go a long way. If you kneel down beside your child's bed at night and you say a short prayer before saying goodnight to them, that consistent connection is what's valuable. It's the little things over a long period of time that builds trust and sets an example. Like it's rather like working out or exercising. Like if you can skip it for years, but don't expect to go into the gym and in one major workout reset everything. Like that's not how it works. It's the little consistent intentional moments that create that connection, and it also models that connection.
Absolutely. I can agree with that. That's how I always saw my mom growing up. She was always, she got her coffee, went back into bed, had her quiet time, always saw her in her word, praying to God. And yeah, that is the picture that's ingrained in my mind. So I 100% agree with that.
My wife had when my kids were growing up, she would keep a gratitude journal. And she would write down 3 things in the morning that she was thankful for. Lots of things she would repeat. Like you didn't have to write down 3 different things every day, but she just write down 3 things she's thankful for. And I can't tell you, but a number of times I saw my kids flipping through her gratitude journal, and just a list of things that she was thankful for. And I thought, man, how helpful is it that they know that she's grateful for these things, grateful to God for these things. And, that example modeling that is it just goes such a long way.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. What advice would you give to parents who may feel pressured to prioritize productivity and performance over connection with their children?
I'm trying to answer this in a way that doesn't make me a hypocrite. Which is a little bit, that's something that I've struggled with over the years. And here's where I encourage parents, if as a place to begin. I think I've gotten better at it now because I recognize that connection has production value. Like it pays off. But one of the ways that I initially approach this is to take my production opportunities and turn them into connection moments. So what I mean by that is, if I had different work responsibilities that I could include one of my kids in, I would include one of my kids. If I had a work trip that I was taking, I would let the kids take turns going with me if possible. I would, in the mornings when I had my connecting time with God on the front porch, and one of my kids would wake up early, I'd have them come sit down and I'd ask them, different questions related to, to what I was praying about or what I was working on in that way. If I have work to do on the farm, if I'm chopping wood, or I say chopping, I'm using a chainsaw, but if I'm cutting up wood, I'd take my son with me to pick up the pieces. But so, finding ways to include your kids, whether that's when you're emptying the dishwasher and having them help you, like there are connecting opportunities there. The problem for a lot of us who are production oriented is that it slows us down. It makes us less productive. And so I can just naturally think to myself, I will get this done much more quickly if I do it by myself. I'll get this marked off my list, much faster if they're not doing it with me. But what you lose in that is the connection. And so, including your kids in your production when possible. I know, a lot of times it's not, creates connection opportunities, and you're also discipling them and teaching them as you do it. They're learning new things from you while you do it. But I think that's a good place to start, is to say, okay, how can I include my child in this production effort and use it as a way to connect? That's my realistic answer, because it's really hard to just suddenly start developing all these new ways of approaching, production connection. It's very difficult to say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to start doing things differently. Yeah, instead, if you can include or prioritize connection within some of your patterns and in some of your routines, I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I love that, because I know it can seem more difficult, especially in today's world with what you talked about earlier, screen time and all those distractions. But when you can just simply include them in what you're doing, not like, oh, I have to think of this whole other thing that's more appealing to them than their screen time.
That's good.
It's just, they want to have connection with you. That's what your kids want. They want to have that time with you. So I love you. Just include them in what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Like, maybe the reason you don't want to include them is because you don't think they'll enjoy it. But you are so right. Like, they want to be included, and they want that connection. So yeah, great point.
So how about, what would you say to couples? I'm sure there are people within their marriages who are seeking that connection as well. How can couples balance their desire for a strong, stable marriage with the need for connection and surrender to Jesus in their relationship?
Well, I think it helps a ton to recognize really clearly that those two things are not exclusive. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. They go together. And, in pursuing Jesus, you are learning how to pursue your spouse, and loving Jesus and being loved by Jesus. You're learning how to love your spouse. Probably the best example of this is grace. When I am connected to Jesus, I recognize his grace towards me. I recognize that when he sees me, the Bible says he sees me without blemish or defect. He sees me, and my sins are separated from me as far as the east is from the west. He sees in me the righteousness of Christ. When I take the time to connect to Jesus, I'm so much more aware of that. And when I am aware of that, it overflows. I become much more gracious with everyone around me, and certainly with my wife. When I spend time recognizing that he looks at me through the lens of grace, it gives me a grace lens to see my marriage, to see my wife. It allows me to look for the positive and the good and the beautiful, instead of focusing on things that are negative and difficult. But all of that, I think, uniquely overflows out of a deep connection to Jesus, that he gives us grace. And as we receive it, we have it to give. If I'm being harsh with my wife, if I'm being critical of her, and short with her, if I'm treating her that way, I can tell you that the most likely reason for that is that my time with Jesus is being cut short, because I just won't treat her that way when I am walking in his grace. The Bible says in Proverbs, that it's to your glory to overlook an offense. And the word overlook there is to not notice. It's not that you forgive them, so you don't even notice it. And that's the way I want to be loved. I think that's the way my wife wants to be loved. It's not that there aren't offenses. It's that she doesn't notice them and I don't really notice them. I think that happens uniquely when we recognize how we're loved by God through Christ and that. So I think it begins by understanding that connection. I think the second thing is that you take some steps to connect spiritually together, that you understand that that's the foundation issue. I heard a story about a couple who had some cracks in their wall that they were wanting fixed and painted over. And so they had the painter come in and kind of give an estimate for it. And he painted over the cracks, but like a few weeks or months later, the cracks came back and they had a different painter come in and say, hey, how much does it cost to fix these cracks in the wall? And the painter said, well, I can't really give you a price because you don't have a crack in the wall problem. You've got a foundation problem, and we can keep painting over these cracks in the wall, but they're just going to come back. You got to deal with the foundation. I think your spiritual intimacy in your marriage is the foundation, and you can paint over the cracks in the wall, meaning that you can address a lot of things that might need to be addressed. Eventually you need to paint over those cracks, but until you recognize and prioritize your spiritual connection, those cracks just have a way of coming back. And so I think there's practical ways to do that don't take a lot of time. I challenge men, a lot to just pray out loud with your wives, like, or for your wives, like just pray out loud. It doesn't need to be long, 2 or 3 sentences. But I would say to husbands who might listen to this, if you will, at night for a week, set your timer if you have to. Don't let her know because it's not very romantic, but set it for 3 or 4 minutes. Rub your wife's back while you pray out loud for her. The prayer doesn't need to be 3 or 4 minutes. Prayer can just be a few sentences. You do that for a week and you will experience a different kind of connection to your wife, and it will have taken you 20 minutes out of your entire week. That, and the reason is because the time you're doing it and the way you're doing it, it's not just a connection, it's a spiritual connection. And she was made, and I'm speaking to husbands because I'm a husband. I mean, I would also encourage wives to pray over their husbands, but there's something powerful about that. And so if you'll prioritize the spiritual connection together, even if it's just going to church together, holding hands during worship, pay attention to that. If you hold your spouse's hand during worship and think of it as a time to spiritually connect with them, it happens like that. I just think that God has made us that way. For my wife and I, it's going for a walk in the evening. It's also doing things like, hey, we want to connect in our bedroom. So there are certain things we're not going to talk about. We're not going to bring financial stress. We're not going to talk about the kids in our bed when we're laying in bed together. We're going to talk about things that connect us more deeply and things that are uniting. And doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about those things, but find the right, don't do it right before you go to bed at night. like find the right time and place and talk about those things. And then use those kind of sacred spaces for a deeper, more intentional connection.
Those are so good. I love when you talk about in the book. So you bring up when Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches, but you point out that it doesn't say you are the branch and you're the only one on there. You're the branches. We have to work together. We do have to have that connection with other people, with our spouses, with our children, the people we work with. And would you mind sharing? I loved when you shared the story about the coffee rival that happened on your staff and your experience on going to a coffee shop. I just thought that was hilarious.
Well, I'm in my 40s, and on the staff here at church, you've got people 40s, 50s, we got a lot of people in their 20s, and there's just this division when it comes to coffee. You've got the coffee, I call them the coffee snobs, but they have all kinds of intricate ways that they make their coffee, and there's different instruments, and it looks to me like dark magic when they have it all laid out there. I don't trust the process at all. And I like my gas station coffee. I prefer it. I like my Keurig coffee. That's good enough for me. And so I kind of joke about in the book of the division that took place on staff between the coffee snobs and the rest of us. And then finally kind of accepting the challenge of going to a coffee shop that was kind of where the coffee snobs like to spend time together and hang out. And so I finally went and was way over my head. I didn't understand, a lot of I didn't understand how to order. Like I got up there to order the coffee, and he's like, well, what origin do you want? I'm like, I don't know what that means. And he's like, do you want the Peruvian? Do you want your coffee from Peru? And I'm sure. I just I didn't know how anything worked. But everyone in there did, they all kind of valued the same thing, and they kind of dressed alike, honestly. And it was just like walking into this community around coffee that I clearly didn't belong in, or I wasn't a part of. And so, my challenge for people is to recognize the importance of community, the importance of being with people who have a like-mindedness, where they are prioritizing connecting to the vine along with you. One of the things I did for this book is I talked to a guy who took care of a vineyard, and he showed me that, like, when a vine is not connected to other branches, it ends up in the dirt. And once it's in the dirt, it doesn't really grow any fruit, even if it's connected to the vine. So the branch has to be picked up out of the dirt, cleaned off, and then gets intertwined with other branches as a way to uphold it, as a way for it to grow. And so there's something that happens when the branches are woven together, when they're supporting each other, they're holding each other up, they have this common commitment to the vine as their source of strength and their source of joy. And so for the application there, of course, is that if your way's not going to work if your way is not with other people. Like it's not how we were made. That God made us to connect to Jesus as the true vine, but he made it so that we should do that together as branches.
Yes, absolutely. This has been so encouraging, so insightful. Do you have any last encouragement, wisdom that you'd like to share with the listeners?
It's been good to talk to you. I appreciate you letting me be on. And I guess the one thing I would say is if your way is not working, the most obvious thing to do is sometimes the hardest thing to do, and that's ask for help. If you're feeling overwhelmed, as a parent, and you're afraid to tell somebody that, or you're afraid to share it because of what you're not alone. So just ask for help. You find someone who's a follower of Jesus, who's on the journey with you, or maybe someone who's a little further ahead, and just tell them, my way is not working and I don't know what to do. I think God blesses that. The Bible says, that when we humble ourselves, that God blesses us. And so if you'll humble yourself by asking for help, that's one of the most difficult, but one of the most profound things you can do.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Would you mind in closing praying for our listeners?
I'd love to. God, thank you for your grace towards us. Thank you that when our way isn't working, you are not harsh with us. You are not discouraging towards us. You're not judgmental of us. That when our way isn't working, you meet us where we are with your grace and your love. You come to us as a kind and gentle Father. And Jesus, you make a way. You don't tell us to figure out a way to fix it and then come to you. You come to us and you walk with us in it. And so I pray, God, that for everyone listening to this right now, that you would give them that grace, that they would know that they're not alone, that they would ask you for help, they would find encouragement and support from others, and they would just take some steps to prioritize connection. That starting today, they would schedule some time with you. Starting today, they'd maybe go for a walk or write it in a journal, but they would intentionally give some time and attention to you. The time where the phone is put up, time where it's quiet and they can just connect more deeply to you. Even if it's just starting with a few minutes a day, God, I pray that you would give them that conviction and give them that opportunity. And so, God, I pray for your strength and courage for each person listening to this, that if they feel some despair or hopelessness because things just haven't worked out their way or the way they hoped they would, I pray, God, that you would let them know that you see them and that they would know your presence, experience you in a deeper way as they live out your invitation to be the branch. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Yeah, great to visit with you. Thank you.
You too.